So welcome everyone, and thanks for coming along. And excited to host our first XD coffee chat. So yeah, as I mentioned, we'll get underway shortly. I'll just wait a few minutes for people to arrive. But I thought whilst we're waiting, I thought I might start a bit of a tradition by asking our guest speaker a bit of an icebreaker question. So not to put you on the spot, Martin, hope you don't mind. So our webinar series is called XD Coffee Chat. So I'd love to know if you could be anywhere in the world right now drinking a coffee, where would you be, and what would you be drinking and why?
I like it. This is good because my presentation isn't about coffee. So if it's going to be called a coffee chat, we better have a bit of a chat about coffee at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. I think I would say that when we've got two relatively small children, and when we go, my wife is Spanish, so when we go to Spain, every morning we leave the kids with their grandmother, and we go down for a coffee. And it's not like a particularly romantic location or anything like that, but it just represents an hour where me and my wife can sit and have a café con leche and just watch the world go by, or watch all the tourists going back and forth, or the other tourists go back and forward, and just kick and people going to and from work, and yeah, it's just a busy spot. Watch the world go by and enjoy a coffee and maybe a pastry as well, because why not?
That sounds nice. Yeah, I would love to be there right now. I'd say, but yeah, no, cheers for that, Martin. Awesome. So yeah, let's get underway then. So let's find out a little bit more about XD Coffee Chat. So I guess firstly I'll introduce myself. So my name's Lee Jeffrey, and I'm a UX team lead here at Sage, working in our experience design team. So I think since joining Sage, I've met a lot of incredible people in our teams doing lots of great work. So I just wanted to explore a way of how might we create a bit of an external platform to allow our XD team to chat about all things design at Sage. So we'll be meeting monthly online, chatting with a variety of people in our XD team, exploring topics such as accessibility, design systems, research and content, kind of finding out more about the methods and workflows we're using here to solve problems and deliver great experiences. So I'm quite passionate about accessible design, so I'm thrilled to be able to kick off our series of webinars with an accessibility focused discussion. Sage accessibility is in everything we do. We design and build products for everyone in line with our core purpose, which is removing barriers. So we believe better digital accessibility supports people with disabilities or impairments to thrive in the workplace. And this week we've been celebrating Global Accessibility Awareness Day here at Sage, and the accessibility team and Champions Network ran an action-packed day yesterday covering a number of topics, from building accessible components to kind of sharing personal journeys. So I know it's been a bit busy week for you, Martin, so a huge thank you for giving up your time today. Yeah, I guess what a fitting way to end such an impactful week. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Martin so he can introduce himself and explore his talk, which is accessibility doesn't just mean WCAG compliance. So feel free to use the Q&A if it's available in Teams, or use the chat function if that's available, to ask any questions, and then we'll grab some time at the end and then we'll try and cover as much as we can before we kind of close out the session. So yeah, I'll hand over to you now, Martin.
Perfect. Thanks, Lee. You should see a big grey screen with just some letters. Accessibility doesn't just mean WCAG compliance, my name, and I think yeah, I got today's date right. That's yesterday I didn't get the date right. I think I thought it was the 17th yesterday for some reason, and I gave two presentations at the GAD celebrations that we marked. So I'm glad I've got that right. At the first thing's gone well. Also, just to let you know that I will be posting a PDF of these slides afterwards to the chat. So don't feel that you have to frantically scribble everything down. Just sit back, relax with your coffee, and listen to me chat. So the PDF will be in the chat afterwards, but if you do prefer a different format like Keynote or PowerPoint, then let me know and I can export it in one of those formats. I know they're more accessible than PDF, so just ask. There are a bunch of references that I make throughout as well, so they're all linked to at the bottom, so you'll have those for reference as well. So yeah, basically I want to talk to you about why WCAG or WCAG or WCAG or WCAG or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is just a baseline and not the end goal for accessibility. So yeah, a little bit about me first, I guess. I know many of you I'm yet to meet, but yeah, just a little bit about what I do, how I got to sort of what I'm doing at the moment. My background is I had about a decade in freelance, concentrating on HTML, CSS, and simple sort of intuitive designs and interfaces. From that, I was persuaded by someone that I did some freelance for to give up the kind of life of the kind of freelance life and to take an actual proper job. So I worked as a design lead at a startup for a while. Before then moving to UK government, where I contracted there for about 2.5, 3 years as an interaction designer. In UK government, you follow all sorts of very strict rules. Accessibility is very, very important, as it should be anywhere. But yeah, the learning curve was steep, although I'd always had that kind of accessible kind of approach. To really dig into the code and work out what's going on it was a great experience. I've been at Sage since 2020 now, so coming up for 3 years. Which is, yeah, it's flown by. But I was Sage's first accessibility specialist, which is quite exciting. What I've done since I've started, I initially focused on and continue to focus on culture and education within the company, just to make sure that people have awareness of accessibility, and where they do have an awareness or a curiosity to kind of to feed that, to kind of educate people and let them have a kind of a route to understand more. I support designers, developers, testers, and product managers. That anybody who needs support gets it, basically. And I'm building a little team, a little A team of accessibility specialists. We have an auditor, we have designer, and other departments as well have started to hire accessibility specialists too, which is great to see. So yeah, I'm right on the back, as Lee mentioned, I'm right on the back of a day of workshops and presentations yesterday to mark Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So yeah, this is one last push for the week before I can put my feet up and enjoy a well-deserved weekend. But yeah, so without further ado, that's enough about me. I'll talk to you about going beyond WCAG and why that's a good idea. So what I'll cover in this presentation, I'll cover what WCAG actually is, because I think that's important. As a starting point, I'll cover a real-life example of where compliance isn't enough. And kind of you can probably map that to the kind of, if you're in the digital product world, you can probably map that real life example, architectural example, to what you do quite nicely. I'll then take you through 3 easy things that we can do beyond WCAG compliance, so some actual practical top tips for you. And I'll talk to you briefly about level AAA. WCAG 2.1 is where we are at the moment, and that's the version 2.1. It has levels. People usually look to hit AA, but AAA is often seen as this unattainable level. The good news is that although entirely hitting AAA is very difficult, getting things right inside your product, you can still get as many AAA wins as you can. They're always worth doing. So I'll take you through a few of them, then I'll sum things up at the end. So first up, what is WCAG, or what are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines? This is what the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, this is how they describe WCAG. They're the body behind actually writing the standard, as well as other standards like HTML and all the rest. So they're quite an important body as far as the web goes. But yeah, they say WCAG defines how to make web content more accessible to people with a wide range of disabilities, including visual, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, language, learning, and neurological disabilities. So there's a lot that WCAG attempts to cover. You can read a little bit more about it by following the link in the bottom of this slide as well, once that's been dropped in the chat later. On the same page, they also talk about the limitations of the guidelines. So they say, although these guidelines cover a wide range of issues, they are not able to address the needs of people with all types, degrees, and combinations of disabilities. So that's an important thing to remember, that WCAG doesn't and possibly can't cover everything that they'd like it to. So it's a good baseline for accessibility, but it's not comprehensive. The other issue here is that WCAG can encourage a just enough mentality. So in other words, if we hit WCAG, our job is done. Kind of dust your hands off and you're finished. And I'll demonstrate with this example why that's not the right approach. So here we go, a real life example. This place that I'm going to show you was designed to comply with the law, but it has some glaring accessibility problems, and I'll touch on those as well for you, and as well as a link to a video that you can listen to someone talking a bit more about it. So this is Robson Square in Vancouver, Canada. So quite an incredible looking piece of architecture. Those steps that climb, several flights in this kind of, I don't know what, I'm not big on my architecture, but this kind of industrial looking, really impressive. It looks like a kind of a villain's lair or something in James Bond, but it's a really striking, really beautiful piece of architecture as these steps climb up and the ramp zigzags up the steps as they go up. So the architect here was Arthur Erickson, and yeah, it looks incredible, like a really amazing piece of work. It's compliant with the law, which is a good thing. So you'd think it was a good thing. So this is a quote from a conversation that was had around this on Twitter. Is Twitter still a thing? I'm not sure. If it is, maybe not for long, but yeah, you'll hopefully be able to access this tweet for a while longer. But yeah, what the person said was, in response to the conversation, he said, if the slope of a ramp is less than 5%, the gradient of 5%, then it's not technically a ramp. So handrails, landings, edge protection are not required. And that's kind of incredible that you think, I guess there has to be a threshold at which the law kicks in. But what the architect did, what Erickson did, was he kept the threshold below or just that measurement, so that it meant that the ugliness or whatever of handrails or edge protection were. So and this chap here, that tweeted this, he is an AIA architect and ADA and FHA consultant. So AIA is the American Institute of Architects, and ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the FHA is the Fair Housing Act. So basically, this chap is a qualified architect, and he's very aware, if not kind of, a strong proponent of designing for those with people with accessibility needs, disabled people, and making sure that that architecture is for everybody, not just for the few. So yeah, I think this speaks to the law being something that we could probably do a little bit better than what's the minimum that's required there. So it's compliant with the law, but it's an accessibility nightmare. So yeah, as the chap there alluded to, there are no guardrails. It's dangerous to descend the ramp, and this is whether you're a wheelchair user or if you're using a pram. If you've got a baby in a pram, that's kind of terrifying one way or the other. If you were to lose control, so it's dangerous to descend. It requires some serious strength and stamina to ascend. So going up the ramp is hard work. The YouTube video that I linked to here, a wheelchair user talks about how he's relatively fit, and he found it difficult, but he wonders how possible it would be for maybe perhaps an unfit or an older person to kind of get up those series of ramps. Interesting stuff. So do give that a watch. It requires, it's difficult to distinguish the steps one from the other is another interesting point, that this is not to do with the ramp, but it's to do with the steps themselves. Usually you have a strip or a different color or something across the front of each step, so you can spot where the step starts and the landing of each step is. So yeah, that makes that easier to spot. You can see it if the light's shining in the right direction. So in other words, if the shadows are coming down across the steps, then you can see the darker face of the step, because it's not lit up, it's in the shadow. But if the light's shining on them, then it's very difficult to tell one from the other. So it's easy to trip as you go up them. And the other thing is that it's also very difficult to climb the stairs unless you're on one of the extreme edges, left or right, because you reach a diagonal when you hit a diagonal when you reach the ramp, which is very kind of off-putting, having been on level. So as you ascend, as somebody who might be walking up the stairs, then that's actually very difficult. So it's not only an accessibility nightmare, but it's not really all that usable. It looks great, but yeah, at what cost? It looks great and complies with the law, but at what cost? So that's kind of what I'd like to talk about, but to kind of translate that to the digital. So here are 3 easy things we can do. I hope easy, but that's a little bit of an easy word to throw out there. But yeah, 3 easy things we can do beyond WCAG compliance. So yeah, here we go. Let's dive into the first one. So to avoid disabled buttons is a good thing. So for a word of warning, first of all, this is a content warning. I'm going to quote from WCAG here. The guidelines, you'll know what you're in for here, because the language is very dense and very difficult to interpret, and sometimes, unfortunately, ambiguous as well, which is problematic. So here's what WCAG says. Are you ready? The visual presentation of text and images of text has a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1, except for text or images of text that are part of an inactive user interface component. So, right, what's it saying here? It's basically saying that if you're presenting some text in some format, then it has to meet a particular contrast ratio, unless the thing, that the element that is inactive. So in other words, a button has to have a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. The text has to be at that level in order to be considered readable, unless the button's disabled. So if you've got a disabled attribute, or you've got aria disabled equals true, something like that on there, and you're styling it in a kind of a grey button with kind of grey text on top, you don't have to meet that 5.1 ratio. So essentially, WCAG says disabled buttons are okay. And that is in 1.4.3, which is one of the success criteria. They don't call them rules. They like to make things as fruity as possible. So success criterion are what they refer to each rule as. So yeah, 1.4.3 contrast minimum. That's what that says. But some people may not realize that the button is disabled and they still might try and press it. That's a problem. Some people might wonder what to do to make the button active. Another problem, how do we help the user complete their task? we're not offering them anything other than the disabled button. That's kind of not very helpful at all. Some users might not be able to see the button. Sorry, they might be able to see the button but not read the text because of the low contrast ratio. So they see something there, see something that looks like a button, but they've got no idea. And I've seen users copy and paste text across a button like that. So copy it out of there, paste it into an email client where they've got a white background, and they paste it without formatting, so it's black text, so it's high contrast. And when they do that, then they can read it. It's you know, that was one particular visually impaired user that I was involved with some user testing with. But yeah, not something we want our users to do, to have to copy and paste, go to another application to read something, then come back having then realized actually that button's disabled, or I can't do anything to proceed. So I've just wasted my time. Then you might get users with a higher degree of visual impairment who might not be able to see the button at all because of the low contrast ratio, so they'll just see nothing. Against say light grey against a white background, they might just not be able to see anything. So yeah, problematic. But what's the solution? So if a user, or if we're okay with our users not seeing a button at all, so that's the last person on that last slide there. So if somebody can't see the button, but they can still understand what's going on the interface, perhaps nobody needs to see the button. So maybe we need to get rid of the button altogether. I suspect they probably need to have something. So what we could do is to leave the button active, and we could then use validation if the user is not able to proceed. So if you've got a form, fill the form out. If you've made a mistake somewhere, maybe you've entered a character that's not allowed in one of the fields, or maybe you've accidentally skipped past a field and left it blank, or it needs to be filled in. In that case, what we've got at the bottom is a button that then gives the user help to the user. You know, you press that button and then an error message triggers, which is not a bad thing. An error message is not to be looked at in that kind of way. An error message is basically just something which is there to kind of catch any users who aren't able to complete or haven't completed a task as the instructions have kind of laid out. So if they get to that point, they go, oh yeah, I've added a pound sign in my name by accident. Then yeah, go back up, fix that, and then you can go back down, click the button, and then no error message. You move to the next page. All's well. So yeah, that's the good news, is you can just leave your buttons active and use validation to help if the user can't proceed. The other alternative, and this is maybe less useful in forms and more useful in things like a series of tasks that you have to complete. But another approach might be to replace the button with some content. So what that would do is, where the button will appear, there'll be a little bit of content, perhaps a header, perhaps a little bit of a sentence explaining the route to proceed and why it isn't currently available. So then that way the user knows that route to proceed is there. So once they've gone back up, completed the tasks, they can then go down, and there we go. The button's appeared, and we're in good shape. We can go ahead. So the content told the user what they needed to do to complete to make the button appear, and that also a button would appear, and the user is able to then know where to go to go ahead. So yeah, there's a few different approaches, and none of them are disabled buttons. Another good example would be to avoid icon-only buttons. So again, this is what WCAG says. WCAG says in 2.4.6 headings and labels, it says headings and labels describe topic or purpose. Now that's quite easy to understand. Basically, what you're saying is a heading and a label describes so if a button has a label on it, it should be descriptive as to what that button does. WCAG then goes on to describe the word label or labels as text or other component with a text alternative that is presented to a user to identify a component within web content. So basically what it's saying is a label is, say, a button that has text in it, that's your label. Or a button that has an icon in it, as long as it has, so say you're using a button with an icon and the icon is delivered via an image element, then if the image has alt text, or if it's an SVG, then make sure it has descriptive text, then that is considered a text alternative. So although there's no on-display text, WCAG says it's okay so long as there is behind-the-scenes text. So a screen reader user would be able to understand that, because someone with a screen reader listens to the contents of the page, and they would understand, even though they might not be able to see the screen. Not all screen reader users are blind. If they can't see the screen, they can understand exactly what's going on. And in actual fact, they get a better experience because they get words rather than an icon that they've got to then decipher. So yeah, WCAG says icon-only buttons, absolutely fine. But what if the user doesn't understand the cultural reference point? And this is a really interesting one. I've seen a few conversations over the years. One that stood out to me, one that stands in my memory, was one about check marks or ticks, as you might call them. So in the UK, where I'm from, generally a check mark means correct. If your teacher at school would be marking your homework, they go through your maths, and they say, okay, yeah, correct, correct, correct. All the correct ones get a tick, all the incorrect ones get a cross. And then you get your mark at the end of it. That's where I'm from. In other parts of the world, check marks don't mean the same thing. So I was reading about Sweden, and Sweden's really not that far from the UK. So if it's very close to the UK, so and so I don't know about how things are further afield, but even at that close proximity, in Sweden, a check mark means incorrect. It means this thing needs attention. So it's essentially a cross. It's a or what I would usually use a cross for. So yeah, just the idea of geographical cultural reference points not meaning the same thing. So we shouldn't rely on that, just in case we're making our users think. I mean, I'm guessing if a Swedish user in the UK is using a piece of UK software, they've probably adjusted to the fact that check marks mean something different here. But again, we're asking people to do that work, so why not back it up with some text as well, or visible text, I should say. Cultural also be generational, and that goes for things like I don't know. I'm old enough to remember floppy disks, those little kind of 3.5-inch floppy disks where you would stick them in your computer, save your homework or whatever, and they were all over the place, and that's where you saved things. So that was used as a metaphor for save. So if you had a document, you wanted to save it, you're working on a Word document, for example, and you want to save it, you would press the little icon that looked like a floppy disk, and it would save it for you. I don't know when the last time I saw a floppy disk was, maybe 20 years ago, maybe, probably longer. So newer or younger generations might have to learn what that thing is, that funny looking square with the circle in the middle and the rectangle thing on the bottom. So yeah, but when they've learned it, fine. But the point is that we're asking people to work something out. Again, not what we should be doing. You might also find that if someone has low vision or can't make out the icon based on their visual impairment, then they would struggle to understand what the button does. So that's kind of not cool. Someone also might have a cognitive impairment, which makes it difficult to recognize shapes. There's a really interesting article I've linked to at the bottom of this slide called Cognitive Vision, Its Disorders and Differential Diagnosis in Adults and Children. Knowing where and what things are. So yeah, what it does, one of the things it touches on is shape recognition, and it talks about how that can be impaired following damage to the brain's left temporal lobe. Not uncommon, and surprisingly not as uncommon as I would have hoped, but it's a thing. So some people might not be able to make that cognitive connection between what they see, the icon they see, and the meaning that's behind that icon, if they have that particular cognitive impairment. So yeah, again, a label with a word would be something else entirely. It would just tell the user exactly what the thing would do when you press it. So then the last thing is if the user uses speech recognition software, which is software that if you don't use a mouse or a keyboard, you can talk to your computer, you can give it commands, you can say scroll up, scroll down, click this, select this text, whatever. And in theory, it does what you want it to do. So if you're using speech recognition software and you see an icon only button, you've got to guess what the command is to click the button. So yeah, I've listened to a podcast once, which really hit home, where somebody was a speech recognition software user, and she was talking about the she said the icon only buttons are trash, and the example she gave was the bin button. So if there was a button and all there was in the button was a little bin, I guess that's the thing. And another thing as well in the UK, that it's a bin. Where I'm from in Scotland, we might call it a bucket. In America, you might call it the trash or trash can, something like that. So that's the object. You could also imagine that that might be an action. So, okay, remove, delete, something like. So, what's the word you would use to trigger that button? If the little bin had an icon, had a word, excuse me, had a word next to it saying delete, then all you would have to do as a speech recognition software user say click delete, instead of going through the guessing game or having to use some kind of workaround like show numbers and then say click the number that's associated with the little bin. So yeah, it's just that we're asking users to do more work. What's the solution? Essentially, just add a visible label to visible text to the label. That is the solution. And I know there's a practical cost to this, or a practical angle to this as well, in that you can't necessarily just swap one thing for another, especially if it's going to be a different size in the interface. There might be many buttons. Having a label on each is going to cause problems. So there is probably a bit of a more holistic redesign needed. And when you do that kind of redesigning, really put yourself under some extreme constraints. So there are three things that WCAG asks of you, or demands, I guess, or requires of you as a designer. And it talks about something called reflow. So that's when what that says is that content should reflow to fit the container. So essentially, your website should be responsive, so that if you or digital product, it might be an iPad or an iPhone app, or some other kind of, or an Android app for that matter. But the principle stands true for all these things. You can log into your application on one device, and then pick it up on another one, and everything should be available and nice and easy to get through. The content should just reflow, and as the device is squeezed to that small size. So yeah, so think about when you're redesigning, think about your icon only buttons now have a label. Think about them on those small screens, and that'll put you under some really serious constraints and really inform that more holistic redesign. And while you're at it, bump the zoom up to 200%, and that way you can have a think about it in terms of a user who might have a visual impairment and needs the words to be bigger. And also, while you're at it, you could add some extra letter spacing or text spacing. So some users, for example, dyslexic people, might have a little bit of extra letter spacing. They might have a little bit of extra spacing between words, or between each line, or even between each paragraph, just to make the text easier to identify and read. So yeah, that also pushes the interface down and out, and you know, again, that responsive design should take care of that. So put yourself under those really tight constraints, and think about those users and users who use the web in that way. It might be that you use the web in that way, but yeah, when you're thinking about icon only buttons, don't try and move away from that kind of traditional way of thinking about things with a fixed horizontal and vertical canvas. And that'll kind of really give you a better redesign when you come to that. The third thing is to avoid animation when we know the user doesn't want it. So this definitely does deserve a little bit more explanation. But first of all, this is what WCAG says. WCAG says, brace yourself, for any moving, blinking, or scrolling information that 1, starts automatically, 2, lasts more than 5 seconds, and 3, is presented in parallel with other content, there is a mechanism for the user to pause, stop, or hide it. And that is from 2.2.2, pause, stop, hide. So basically what WCAG is saying is that animation or motion animation is okay if the user has triggered the animation, or if the user can pause, stop, or hide the animation, or if the animation lasts for less than 5 seconds. Those are the kind of three things that they kind of, I mean, they talk about parallel with other content there as well, but it's usually going to be that there's other content around your animation. So yeah, that's not really a factor. But yeah, those are your three parameters. It's been user triggered, it can be paused or stopped or hidden, and it lasts for less than 5 seconds, in which case WCAG's okay with that. But here we are with the big but. What if it triggers nausea? In other words, if you have a vestibular disorder, which is something to do with the balance in the inner ear, motion can really make you feel ill, or the perception of motion when you're not moving, rather. So yeah, nausea is a thing. Migraine's a more serious thing yet. So yeah, if it triggers migraine, then that's another problem that we want to avoid. And worse still, seizure. So if someone has photosensitive epilepsy and your motion animation triggers a seizure, then that's not something you want to be. That's something you definitely want to be avoiding putting your users through, because that can be extremely serious. And then think about people who might have ADHD or anxiety. How do the animations feel to them? Basically, any of these people, you don't want these people to be visiting a page with animation and frantically looking for a pause button. That's not cool. You also don't want to, there's no guarantee that something unpleasant or dangerous hasn't already been triggered by within that 5 second period. So yeah, I think WCAG does set thresholds, but again, I think we can do better. So what's the solution? And this is worth concentrating now. So if you're so focus with me here. This is tough. So only animate if, first of all, the user has an operating system where they can set reduced motion, and most operating systems now do and have done for several years. If you're using iOS, Android, a Mac, if you're using Windows, any of those operating systems will support have some kind of setting in their settings or preferences which allow you or tell the system to reduce motion. iOS is a nice one to do that on if you want to try that. Usually what happens is when you tap an app, the app springs out of the app application icon and becomes full screen. And then when you close it by swiping up, it kind of goes back into the icon, and it's a really nice animation, but again, problematic for some users. So what happens if you've switched the reduced motion setting on is that it fades the app in and then fades it back out again when you close it. There's no movement when they do that. It's just fade in, fade out. So yeah, that you can have it play with that right now if you want. So yeah, operating systems have to have the ability to set the reduced motion flag. The other thing is that the browser that the user uses inside their operating system, the web browser, again, talking about web apps specifically, but this applies to any, that browser has to support the reduced motion API. And I know API is a bit of a fancy word, but basically that just means that can the browser go to the operating system settings and go, is the reduced motion switch on? Okay, it is, or okay, it's not. So it knows, it can check basically. And then the last thing to check is, has the user actually toggled that reduced motion switch on or not? So we only animate if the user has the ability to turn on reduced motion, the browser that they're using can check, and the user hasn't turned on reduced motion. So if all of those three things are come back as a thumbs up, then we can animate. That's fine. Otherwise, don't. Basically, if we can't tell the user, if we can't tell if the user wants animation or not, then we don't animate, because that's a risk that I wouldn't be willing to take. And obviously, if the user has told us no, don't animate, then absolutely don't animate. So the other way to look at it, so the other way to look at it is to sort of think about zero motion animation. So that would be like fading in and out. Basically, is okay in a lot of cases, but do use that sparingly and only use it where it's helpful to the user. And sorry, the first point there about the zero motion animation was more about don't reduce the animation or the motion, actually get rid of it. You know, I think this was an example where Apple's product pages used to do this. They used to have less animation. Usually they're like all animation things flying in and spinning around and stuff, but they reduced it. And then some years ago they decided actually let's just get rid of it. So it just becomes a static website. It's actually much nicer between you and me. But yeah, much simpler and much easier to read. But yeah, what they did is they just got rid of it entirely. So again, it's that like, who are we to judge how much motion is okay and how much isn't? For me, just get rid of it. And if the user has told us that they don't want it, or we can't tell if the user has or not. Yeah, and also just to think about the non-animated design when you're designing what you're doing. So an image should be, animation should be thought of as static first. Basically, the meaning should be exactly the same for something which is animated and for something that's not animated. So if you're thinking about something like an animated GIF or some kind, like a little video that plays and loops, and the meaning of that video should be the same without the animation. So that essentially, if you're serving it, again, this is going to get into the technical, but if you're using HTML picture element, then the alt text for both of those things, whether it's an animation or a static PNG or JPEG, then, or WebP or AVIF, those are exactly the same in terms of the description and meaning. Right, and finally, just to let you know, don't forget AAA. So I did mention the conformance levels before. So single A is the lowest level of conformance to WCAG. Double A is the standard, and it's Sage's baseline. And that includes all of the single A and all of the double A criteria. And yeah, the third one and the highest one is the AAA, which means that you've hit every A, every double A, and every AAA. So that means you've reached AAA compliance. Hard to hit AAA, but lots of the individual criteria are very achievable. So here's 3 things that you can do to meet those. This one is that you probably already meet some, and keyboard is a good one, a good example of that. So if you already meet 2.1.1, which is keyboard, which is double A, then you probably already meet 2.1.3, which is keyboard, no exception. So that's one that you've already probably met. So that's good. The second one that's easy to meet, but will need a little bit of work, is to explain abbreviations the first time they appear on each page. And if you do that, then you've met 3.1.4 abbreviations. It's a very similar one for jargon and technical terms as well. So just explain them, and the first time you use them, and then after that you can use the abbreviations all you want. WCAG everywhere, so long as you said at the start, WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, yeah, that kind of thing. And then there's things which are a little bit more effort, and a good example of that would be that if you ensure content can be understood by people with a lower secondary education level, then you've met 3.1.5 reading level. And lower secondary education level is about 11 years of age. Sage has taken the gov.uk lead, and we're looking to make content readable by users with a reading age of 9 years of age. So yeah, we've kind of gone even further than that, just to make sure that all the things we do are nice and understandable. So to sum up, only break best practices as a last resort. So alternate designs should be thoroughly explored first. So if you've got, let's go with the disabled button example. If you've got a design which incorporates a disabled button, then think of every other way you could possibly design that page without a disabled button, and you're bound to find a better alternative. I've only once have I got in a situation with a group of designers where we couldn't think of an alternative, and even then, at the 11th hour, somebody, I think it was like one of those in the shower moments, they came to the meeting that day and they said, I've cracked it, I've worked it out. So and right enough, sure enough, they had. So I've never found a situation where an alternative design to something like a disabled button wouldn't be achievable or doable or better. So, but if you do find yourself in a situation where those alternate designs really can't work, then you should do some inclusive user testing first to make sure that, okay, there is no alternative, but at least we're going to check with users that this is understandable, that disabled button is understandable and isn't going to cause problems. And that should, as I say, inclusive user testing, because you want to make sure you're including people who we know might struggle with a disabled button, because if they're okay with it, then okay, my assumption was wrong, and we're okay. We can ship this. Again, it's unlikely, but those are the two things that are really need to be satisfied before you can break those best practices in good conscience. So only when no other designs work and it's been shown to users and that they don't struggle, and then only in that situation should the best practice be broken. But yeah, there's always an alternative. And just one last quote to leave you with. This is not from WCAG, you'll be glad to hear. And this is from a fellow accessibility specialist, a chap called Nicholas Steenhout. And he said recently in a LinkedIn post that WCAG is the starting point to accessibility, not the target. We should work towards accessibility, not just towards standards conformance. Go above and beyond the standards and build truly accessible things. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Martin. I feel like I learn something new every time I hear that talk, and yeah, I think I'll be careful how I reference bucketing when next time I visit Scotland. There is some questions in the chat, which is great. Yeah, we've got some time for that as well. So Ella's got a question. Hi Ella, I think I recognise you from NUX Manchester. So she says, I think it was around when you was showing the guidelines around disabled buttons. She said, why do you think WCAG have put those guidelines in for inactive buttons if it won't be accessible? Curious around the decision making there. But I think then she went on to say, I think that question is going to apply to kind of all those points. So why do you think WCAG will put those guidelines in if some of them have loopholes that could make something inaccessible?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it's maybe down to general sort of pragmatism. I mean, the disabled attribute and ARIA disabled equals true or false are part of the HTML specification and the ARIA the ARIA being a kind of another layer on the markup. So those specifications that they both include those things, and they've been around forever. I think it's one of those ones where if you were to say don't do this, then because it often needs, it's one of those things that doesn't really or doesn't always work as a like for like swap in the same way that the icon only buttons. If you were to add a label to every icon only button in the world, then lots of interfaces would need some fundamental rethought or rethinking, or the company would be held in breach of the law, and sort of, in other words, they'd be discriminating against people. So I think the line has to be drawn somewhere, and I think the line is drawn on a more kind of conservative level, just because it would probably cause too many problems, too many lawsuits, too much money being spent. But I think it's one of those things that's kind of WCAG, that kind of illustrates why WCAG is just like the starting point. So if you conform to WCAG 2.1 AA, then you're in good shape, but you're not in great shape necessarily. So it's about kind of going above and beyond idea, where in the same way that if I was designing for if I was designing an interface, and well, I'd say me, but actually it's a bad example because I wouldn't, but because of what I do for a living. But if a designer's designing something and they often think about themselves as they're doing it, so, and that's perfectly natural. You think about, I'm using a mouse here, I might use the keyboard a bit with my left hand, but that's not my primary way of getting around. And I can see the screen, and it's a good screen. It's a nice screen. So people tend to think about the things they design in terms of how they would use them. So it's that kind of thinking about things in the way that other people would use them. And if you're thinking about, okay, how does a mouse user get through this that can see the screen, get through this in the most efficient and as nice a way as possible, then we really should be thinking about that for everybody. Because yes, the person using a mouse and looking at the screen might get through from start to finish, but it might be a really horrible experience. And what we're kind of looking to do for those users is to give them the best experience. But oftentimes we forget about people who use different input mechanisms. So yeah, it's just that baseline's always there. WCAG just says basically, can you get from A to B? You might have a few workarounds and some barriers and well, not barriers, but some hurdles in the meantime. But can you get from A to B? Yeah, pretty much. Okay, minimum viable product. But yeah, what I'm kind of saying here is that, like, yeah, that's fine as a minimum, but yeah, let's do better. Because yeah, and I suppose it's that kind of practical kind of, yeah, what's the bare minimum we can demand of people? I think that must have been the kind of the thinking behind WCAG, because doing all the nice to haves and all the extra experience things is extra and costly and disruptive, especially if it's a mandate, if that answers your question.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
good
massive.
answer, thanks.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. Thanks, Ella.
Couple more there. So James says, what's your advice on convincing stakeholders that you not only have to meet WCAG requirements, but also exceed them?
That's tough. That's really tough, because usually it's just like, well, all we need to do is spend money on achieving this level that's measurable, and everyone in the world more or less seems to use that as their benchmark. Yeah, that's tough. I would say the argument for a better user experience for everyone is a good one. It's a little bit, again, I know that stakeholders can be very kind of very or not so sympathetic beyond that kind of thing as well. That's maybe the person who's looking after the budgets and things now. Well, that's fine, but we don't have to hit that, so we're not going to. And so yeah, I get that. But you could also use things like user research if you've got access to that. And I know it's not always possible, and certainly in Sage it's tricky at the moment. It's getting easier as our products get more accessible, but we are still very much on that journey to being accessible. So if you have access to a real representative or properly diverse pool of users, then make sure that you're testing with users with disabilities and various impairments. That's a really powerful message to stakeholders, to say we spoke to Rob, and Rob had all this trouble with our disabled elements. He had to copy and paste things into his email, and then to read it, and then we're asking him to do a lot, which isn't, I think those human stories are important. Again, not always possible, but if you can find videos, maybe there's plenty of YouTube resources or articles that have been written about things where it references people. It's that human angle that it's these are real people that are struggling with these interfaces. So if we can unblock or make their lives easier, then we really should. Again, yeah, difficult to sell. But then I guess that's, as designers, I think we're often salespeople to a great extent. So nothing we're not used to. But if you ever need any backup or any ammunition, then feel free to hit me or Lee up, and I'm sure we can give you some resources.
Yeah, I just on that, I think Luke put one in the Q&A. So it says, like, from the perspective of an organisation that's not taking accessibility serious, what examples, resources, or activities would you recommend to begin kind of communicating the importance of accessible design in an engaging way? So I know you've done stuff around like empathy labs and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess it's because anything else you could just touch on to give maybe a little bit of insights or guess recommendations of things to try, just to try and get buy-in or people talking around accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious ones like color contrast and things that you can use plugins in your Figma or Sketch workflow to kind of test for. Um, the Yeah, those are kind of relatively easy, but I guess it's thinking about users that don't use the web like you might. I gotta say you might because you may well use a keyboard. But yeah, keyboard's the big one. If you think about focus order and what focus looks like as you tab through an interface. So as a keyboard user, you would press the tab key and that would take you from one focusable thing to the next. And the focusable things are the interactive things like buttons and links and form controls and that kind of thing. So yeah, as you tab through an interface, what things get focused and in what order? Does it make sense? What does it look like? Is it visible? Is it something we're so just to kind of think about that kind of angle, and to actually kind of something that kind of I sometimes do is to ask people to put their mouse away for 15 minutes or so and see how they get on writing an email just using the keyboard, or and get used to that kind of tabbing and using the arrow keys and enter and space and things, to get that kind of idea of how it feels. And you soon realize that, okay, the things I'm designing, I need to be a bit more prescriptive so that the acceptance criteria that go through in the ticket include stuff like that. Eventually, devs will probably just get it, but until they do, you need to do that. But yeah, just that kind of empathy piece. Other than that, I guess just reading a lot, just visiting blogs and following people on Mastodon or Twitter or wherever you are these days, that are kind of specialists. People like Manuel Matuzovic, Adrian Rosselli. I tweet every now and then. I post to Mastodon as well. So I don't know. There are a bunch of people to follow, and from there you can kind of and Ben Myers, you people link to each other's blogs, and you kind of discover new ones. And I'm a big fan of RSS. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's basically a way to kind of subscribe to blogs, and drag all the blog posts in without having to visit every blog. But yeah, I love doing that. And then what I'll do is I'll take those things I've read and I'll post them to like a Slack channel that we've got for accessibility, or a Teams channel, to kind of give other people a bit of an awareness of things. And then that's their little bit of coffee time reading in the morning, 10 minutes or so, and a coffee and an accessibility article. Yeah, I'm not sure I really answered your question there, but
Good. No, cheers for that, Martin. I think it can be. I think it's trying to find other people who have got a passion for accessibility as well within the company, and trying to build a little bit of a little bit of a champions network yourself, or a bit of a working group. And then it really does start with the culture of the company and the culture of the teams, and then trying to spread awareness and trying to do things together rather than solo. But yeah, it can be a difficult journey, but like I said, there's loads of resources out there and people to learn off. We're approaching time. There is a couple more questions there. What I'll do is I'll share those with Martin, and then I'm sure you don't mind, we can send you a quick email with some guidance there, and answer those questions offline as well.
Sure.
So no, really do appreciate that, Martin. Thanks a lot. So it's the first one, and nothing broke. Well, nothing broke yet. So that kind of brings us to the end of the first episode. So yeah, huge thanks again to Martin for chatting to us this month. Thanks again for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and yeah, hopefully see you again soon. Thanks a lot.